Special Report. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Last year, the state of Florida carried out 6 executions. 4 of them survived longer than the judges who sentenced them. Experts claim that since the state frequently gets it wrong, the drawn-out appeals process cannot be cut back. In 1986, Palm Beach Judge Richard Burk condemned Duane Owen to death. He was 25 years old. He was found guilty of killing a 14-year-old babysitter and a 38-year-old mother of 2 in separate incidents months apart in 1984, while the children were sleeping in the homes he targeted. Last June, he was executed at the age of 62. Judge Burk had been deceased for 4 years at that point. Burk died at the age of 87 years old. Delays, ongoing investigations, appeals, changes in state leadership, and legal upheavals all contribute to a reality that, to some, calls into question the death penalty's potential as both a punishment and a deterrent to violent crime. Many inmates sentenced to Florida's death row outlive the judges who sent them there. Those judges are frequently bench veterans whose credentials qualify them to rule on such cases, according to Maria De Liberato, Executive Director of Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty and a former prosecutor-turned-defense attorney. What you sometimes get is people saying we should cut out the appeals process, she pointed out. However, you cannot shorten the appeals process since Florida frequently gets it wrong. The appeals procedure takes so long because it has to. According to the nonprofit Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, D.C., Florida has had 30 exonerations from death row, and Florida inmates sentenced to death are 8 times more likely to have their sentences overturned than executed. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, an inmate's average age upon sentencing is 27 years. The average age of execution is 44 years. However, these data include trials and executions that occurred approximately 50 years after the death sentence was reintroduced in Florida. If a person were executed within 18 years of his or her sentence, it would almost be considered speedy justice today. There are 280 offenders on death row currently, the majority of whom have been there since the 1980s and 1990s. Some are already older than Charlie Griffith, who was executed in Florida in 1951 at the age of 72, the eldest inmate ever to do so. Willie Tommy Ziegler, who was found guilty of homicide and received his sentence in Duval County in July 1976, is the state's death row inmate with the most consecutive years of service. Ziegler was sentenced to death by Judge Maurice M. Paul, who disregarded the jury's recommendation for a life sentence. Ziegler, 78, has maintained his innocence in the deaths of his wife, her parents, and a customer at the furniture company he ran in Winter Garden. As for the judge who sentenced him, he later served on the federal bench. Judge Maurice Paul was 84 years old when he died in 2016. James Rose, the longest-serving death row inmate in South Florida at the age of 78, was convicted in 1977 by Broward Circuit Judge M. Daniel Futch, Jr. for the abduction and homicide of Hollywood child Lisa Berry, age 8, in November 1976. Futch instructed the jurors to continue debating when they deadlocked 6-6 in the punishment phase of the trial, which resulted in the sentence being reversed by the Florida Supreme Court. The Supreme Court determined that Futch should have recognized the vote as a recommendation for a life sentence. A second sentencing phase was scheduled, and the new jury recommended death by 11-1. In 2018, Rose pled guilty to the unrelated rape and murder of Jean Savage in Delray Beach in April 1975. As a consequence of him pleading guilty, he received a life sentence. Futch, his sentencing judge, died in 2009 at the age of 75. Judge Vaughn Rudnick in Palm Beach gave Paul Scott his sentence in 1979. He and Richard Condian were both found guilty of killing James Alessi in 1978. Condian, who pled guilty to second-degree murder, was sentenced to 45 years in jail but was released on a parole after 14 years. Scott, now 67, has maintained his innocence. Rudnick passed away in 1993 at the age of 61. In Miami-Dade County, the longest-serving convict is William Thompson, 72. In March 1976, Thompson and co-defendant Rocco Sorace were found guilty and received the death penalty in connection with the abduction, rape, and homicide of Sally Ivester. Both had their sentences overturned. Thompson testified at Sorace's second trial and admitted to the crime according to court records. Sorace was found guilty of second-degree homicide and subsequently received a life sentence. Thompson was sentenced by Miami-Dade Judge John Tanksley, who died in 2002 at the age of 76. Other long-serving death row convicts follow a similar trend. Harry Phillips, 78, received his sentence in 1984 from Miami Judge Arthur Schneider, who died in 2004 at the age of 81. Broward Judge Stanton Kaplan sentenced Omar Blanco, 73, in 1982. He died in 2012 at the age of 76. Michael Rivera, 61, was sentenced in 1987 by Broward County Judge John Ferris, who died in 2001 at the age of 79. Broward Judge Russell Say sentenced Dennis Sokor, 72, in 1987. Say died in 2011 at the age of 85. In March 2014, Robert Lavin Henry was the last convict executed in Broward County. Mark Poland, the judge who condemned him to death in 1988, lived to see his execution. Poland died in 2016 at the age of 71. Whether you're philosophically against the death penalty or believe it's a righteous application of the law, the fact remains that in practice, it's proven to be a waste of time, said former Broward Circuit Judge Paul Bachman, 75, who sentenced nearly a dozen convicted killers to death during his tenure. Some people had their sentences overturned. Some died from suicide or natural reasons. Few of them are still waiting to be executed. Bachman does not expect to live to see them. He said, "I'll be long gone from Earth before that happens." Please don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay informed.